Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Cove. I'm Jennifer LaPlante. I'm the Executive Director of DeepSense, and I want to welcome you to our third of 6 panel discussions on Mind the Gap, Technologies of Business Optimization for this panel series. Today, I'm joined by 3 great guests who are going to talk about some of their work in AI, robotics, and automation. They're going to share their stories and some insights about how this technology was integrated into business and can be used to optimize operations, reduce costs, increase efficiencies and precisions, and help businesses grow and compete nationally and in global markets. I'm going to introduce the guests in a sec, but first, I want to say thanks to the 80 people online with us today, and we encourage you to participate in conversations. There's a chat function, so if you'd like to submit some questions and some comments, please feel free to do so. I have some colleagues here from Cove who are helping in the background, who are helping manage and monitor that, and they'll curate some of those questions and share them so we can get to you. One other thing too is if you have questions and you can't submit because you're not logged into one of the platforms we're using, please feel free to submit a question to info@coveocean.com. So you can find a recording of this later on as well on YouTube, and we look forward to you joining all of our future sessions. We're going to meet our panelists. So first we'll start with Bruce Stover. So Bruce brings invaluable hands-on experience in his role as founder and president of Precise Design Engineering Solutions. His background in some of the most successful production machine shops in Atlantic, Canada gives him a unique perspective on how design impacts the ease of production and long-term sustainable products. So Bruce has a great background. So he started as a machinist, a shop supervisor, a vice president, and now he's an owner of Precise Design. So that means he's been involved in every single step of the design through production process. That experience is invaluable to his clients, so he helps guide the design that allows for profitable, repeatable production schedules and measurable process improvement. So the great thing about Precise Design and Bruce and his team is they've grown to 3 locations in 2 provinces, running 24/7 shifts to meet demands. With deep experience across food automation, ocean technology, aerospace and defense industries, Precise Design is a leader in optimization of product and process design to meet and exceed organizational goals. We're also joined by Nathan Field. He is from Ingenuity, and he leads the automation and robotics team in Ingenuity Inc., a local engineering firm. Since moving to Nova Scotia in late 2019, Nathan has worked for Ingenuity, bringing their automation and robotics division to life. Nathan has seen the potential of automation while working on Ontario, and he hopes to develop that in Canada, Atlantic Canada specifically. He's looking to bring Industry 4.0 to his current projects, essentially trying to skip the slower automation process that we tend to see as factories try to automate and move forward. He wants to help ensure scalability and optimal functionality to help grow companies to remain more competitive on the global stage. And last but not least is Phil LeBlanc. And so Phil is the president of IMO Foods, which is based on the waterfront in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Phil's worked in the seafood industry for more than 30 years after graduating from Dalhousie and Technical University of Nova Scotia. Phil is currently a board member of the Nova Scotia Seafood Alliance, Perennia Food and Agriculture, Inc., and the Yarmouth Waterfront Development Corporation. So before we actually get into these questions and some of the conversations, we have 3 different topics that are listed that we're going to talk about today: automation, robotics, and AI. And we want to align on a clear definition to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. I'd love to see comments in the chats to see who doesn't necessarily agree with what we're going to talk about today. But to cover off, we're going to start with automation. We're going to define automation today as hardware or software that does things automatically. Often automation tends to be process-driven and is a system that mimics human task. Robotics, on the other hand, refers to a physical robot that is programmed to complete a task. And AI is a computer program that allows a computer to mimic human intelligence. And this can range from basic if-then statements to deep neural networks. So to start, we're going to go across the board, and we'll start first with Bruce, and then everyone will answer our first question to get us going. So you all invested in AI, robotics, and automation, or some combination of the 3. Can you describe a little about how you ventured into adopting this type of technology and what the early experience was like trying to integrate this into your work environment? So Bruce, do you want to start?
Sure. So thanks for having me here today. We've got 3 locations, and with the CNC machining that we do to back up our designs and builds, we're running the plants 7 days a week in some cases, and after hours. Well, with that, we try to get people to run multiple machines and whatnot. So automation, I'm going to talk more to automation and robotics from our personal experience, not our design experience, but our personal experience. We when we had to unload and load parts all the time, it takes time away from machines and people, and we were able to start looking at automation just with some of the equipment we were buying, adding bar feeders, low hanging items, such as we added conveyors. We modified our machines to put custom conveyors on the front and the outfeed of the machine. But what that did is actually brought our team up slowly to see the potential of simple things like automation with simple conveyors, with simple bar feeders. I'm going to talk a lot to culture today. I think it's important for companies to bring their teams up slowly, and you can identify pain points, and it doesn't have to be a real complicated transition to get buy-in from your team. Take it on slowly and get a win, and then move on to the next one. But we invested and did custom conveyors and added bar feeders, and very quickly at all three shops we were running equipment unmanned, which is huge for us. But our people can run more complicated projects, and you can move the manpower a lot more effective. Within the last year, we've actually put a 35 kg robot on the floor, and previously we might be doing low end high volume parts with the conveyors and whatnot. We invested in the robot for our machining cells, that all of a sudden we can now run parts that might be higher value parts, more complicated parts, because the robot can now handle them instead of dropping them or damaging like our previous processes. So for precise design, it's been a great transition over years of just simple automation, going through the learning curve, experiencing the problems, because there are going to be problems. And the saying I use around here all the time, if you're going to count the failures, you better count the wins. And that is very, very important for our team, because you are going to fail. There's going to be problems with any form of the automation. You're going to find areas that, whether it's other bottlenecks, whether it's production jams, whether it comes in many fashions. But for us, the robot was the biggest challenge, and we're still working through some of that. That went in a year ago, and we're running it, but it's still got its challenges that we're learning from today. So that's how we ventured into it. That's where we're at today with the robotics, with the robot on the floor. And I think every machine that has or every company that has a process should be looking at trying to start and looking to implement simply, and then they can start drilling into their operation for future more complicated processes. So if that answered number one.
That is a great quote that you just said, that every company that has a process should be looking at this. I think that's the tweet I'll be making for later on. So Phil, when you think about IMO and when you were adopting different types of technology and you're moving into more automation, can you tell us a little bit that early experience and what problem you were trying to solve?
Yeah, initially we were resistant to technology. Like, we were doing, it's an old style business, and we did things we do and would want to continue doing it the same old way. But we ran into an issue on inspection and quality of the cans themselves. We're a sardine packer, and each can had to be visually inspected by hand. Somebody actually took the can and spun it around and looked at it. And we're doing tens of thousands of cans a day. So soon and difficult job. It took a lot of focus and attention, and we weren't doing a very good job at it. So we had to switch to a vision inspection system, and all of a sudden we're able to do this work very efficiently. And at the time, the job that we were doing by manually was the least favorite job in the factory. It's a job everybody hated, and we had to rotate through people. So there was no issue when we mechanized and automated this part of the process. So that was a win all around. Everybody was happy, and that they didn't have that difficult job to do any longer. And also, we didn't lay anybody off because we have lots of other areas to work. So the people got diverted to another productive area. So that was very useful for us. So that was about 15 years ago that we started that first dive into it.
Fantastic. And I think, both you and Bruce have mentioned culture, which we're going to come back to, culture and people and impact. So there's lots of questions we'll come back to about that. And Nathan, moving over to you in terms of your experience, when you were in Ontario versus also when you've moved over here, can you tell us a little about that foray and the adoption into AI automation and robotics?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I truly do appreciate it and always enjoy having conversations like this. My role at Ingenuity is a little different to say Phil and Bruce, where we're kind of a consulting company that is paid to help clients as opposed to helping ourselves. So it's unique and kind of really enjoyable, to be honest, to help Nova Scotia and help Atlantic Canada get the most out of what we already have. I do agree a lot with Bruce's comment on culture. Also getting a quick win. I think that that's often sort of an easier entry point into a culture change is when you're able to say, check out this little machine that we made that, is able to take away this tedious job that nobody wanted to do anyways. And then everybody's like, okay, this is good. I see a benefit behind that. And being able to help, change that culture, change the attitudes is very, very awesome to do. One thing that we focus on at Ingenuity is trying to help our clients increase quality, production output, data insight. I know I put that in my intro on purpose because in Ontario, it might be, say, 5-10 years ahead of where automation is here. But one thing I would love to do is help bridge the gap in data. So back there in Ontario, they've already gone through the robotics, the machine vision, the solutions that we'll talk about today. And they've skipped into optimizing the solutions they already have. And to accomplish that, data is the best way. So you might hear the term IIoT or Industry 4.0. I'm trying to, skip those steps. So alongside the solutions we already have at Ingenuity, we're trying to make it, more importantly, scalable. Because ultimately, when the solutions, even if they take a while, as Bruce said, even if the solutions take a little bit to implement and you have those quick wins, you ultimately want a scalable system that you can keep feeding into without reinventing the wheel. I'll talk a lot more about that later, but that's certainly the baseline that we try to do at Ingenuity. I also get to work on a lot of really cool R&D projects. So it isn't just solving the problems that people have now, but trying our best to solve the problems they will have tomorrow, or the problems that when we provide an answer for, they're like, oh, didn't know that could be done, right? Such things include 3D vision, AI by my definition, which is, or by a different definition, which is like the ability of learning, machine learning, train data sets, things like that. We have a couple partnerships with Dow as well, working with students and capstone projects. That's exciting to really, not only skip the step on industrial automation, but perhaps produce a product that doesn't exist yet. And that includes, I can't say too much, but seafood industry, 3D vision, random bin picking, things like that. And then once again, data is a big thing. Machine vision is something that we do a lot of. It helps a low entry point into automation. They're often fairly inexpensive compared to an overall solution, but it provides very versatile jobs, like as Phil said, and we have another vision system at Phil's location. So it's exciting. I like to see where things are going. I've been able to, join the team here at Ingenuity. We already have a couple fairly large jobs under our belt. But I'm truly excited to see where it goes from here.
Fantastic. Now, I think all of you are going to have different pieces of advice for anyone who's thinking about trying to make this investment in this leap into automation. And there could be advice either for the owner or the executive team, or maybe it's for somebody who's within the role in the organization. But let's start with you, Phil. What advice would you have for identifying an appropriate use case? And is there an area people should drive into if they're trying to find an opportunity to automate? He's muted.
He's muted. Get something.
Oh, you're muted, Phil. Sorry.
One thing was very useful for me is I think it was a co-op put on a seminar, a day-long seminar at the health airport, and it showed lots of examples of automation, robotics, and it gets the wheels turning in your own mind and in your factory where you could apply some of these ideas. And so that I think is very helpful. There's lots of presentations with examples, and a day-long seminar that's done locally, because that's the other important thing, that be able to source companies to work with that are local. It's fine to go online and see something happening in Japan or Europe, but that maybe you can't bring to your own facility. So this seminar, and I think it's been done a few multiple times, that a co-op puts it on and shows automation. I think it's the perfect way to get an introduction, and then get yourself thinking about your own factory, and then introduce you to some of the players in the area as well.
Great. Bruce, what about you in terms of anyone who might be thinking about making that leap? Is there some kind of appropriate use case they could easily find, or some problem they should try to solve first?
For me as an owner, and I guess an owner, but also we see a lot of automation. The first thing I recommend to any of these companies is to, and I touched on it already, is find the low hanging fruit, find the pain points in your operation. And the pain points for an early win may not be for the management. It might be for the lowest task on the line. But if you can get buy-in, that buy-in from my perspective is everything from a plant. So it may be from an owner's perspective, it may not be the biggest financial reward early on, but it may be the biggest pain point on the line, that maybe it's a general labor, or maybe it's a simple operation that just is a pain point in the operation. In terms of any owner drilling into that, they usually know, because there are usually complaints coming to them. Try to drill into those production areas from a starting point. And if you can drill into those areas and you can get a simple win, then it allows you to step it up, and then it'll pay dividends down the road, taking the more complicated problems on, and the ones that there may be more risk later on. But you need to make sure that people understand that you have to have some wins, but you're going to see some failures before you get to the wins. So from an owner, as seeing it firsthand, as well as implementing automation for clients, that would be my biggest go-to at an early conversation point. So that would be mine.
Great. And Nathan, what about you? I think you're on the different side too, where you're on the outside and you can see in and see opportunity. What advice would you give?
Perfect. So just to comment on Phil's statement there, I often recommend YouTube. Like, in the days of COVID right now, we can't necessarily attend a seminar. We can't see what's out there. If you even have a curiosity, check out YouTube. Put in, what can this robot do? Industrial robots. Check it out. And when things open up, us at Ingenuity, we have an average of, let's say, 5 to 6 robots at any time. Come on by, ping me on LinkedIn, come by, and I'll show you how it works and run through some concepts, right? So that's often the most fun when you get to see things moving and you see the real potential. I also couldn't agree with Bruce anymore about low-hanging fruit, attacking those. It is good to understand a true ROI. or return on investment, but I believe we'll get to that in this presentation. But going from an advice standpoint, what I would often first recommend to any client or anybody considering an automated solution is attempt to determine the root cause of the problem, right? Just because you have a person picking object A and putting it here doesn't mean a robot should be doing the same thing. Perhaps if you can solve the problem downstream, you don't even need to do that, or it's done from the solution down the line. So we call that a discovery at Ingenuity, but it goes by many names. Essentially, all it is take a high-level approach, ignore the fact that you have people or systems in place, and try to distill your problem into sizable chunks. And then that way you have a defined problem and you can go about solving it. So secondly, what I would recommend is taking it one step at a time. Often customers will try to do the whole solution at one time and it fails miserably. And then, it puts a bad taste in people's mouths and word gets around and now everybody thinks that it's a bad idea, right? So take it one step at a time. If you can handle it internally, great. If not, reach out to a local integrator or somebody that could help you along with the process. And also, I mentioned it before, but try your best, as Bruce said, try your best to do the most bang for your buck, the lower hanging fruit, but be sure that you take into account the entirety of an ROI calculation. Don't just look at labor. Don't look at replacing, person X and getting that output. But instead, take a look at risk and all the other metrics that I'll talk about. And after all of that is done, go ahead and attack that low-hanging fruit. It may not be the most expensive solution. It might not be the cheapest, but if you take into account the other elements, then you'll be sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck, right? And also as well, I said it before, and I'll probably say it again, but when you're working with an integrator, try to think about future-proofing your design. Often what happens is a customer will get a one-off, a very good solution at doing one particular thing, but then they may get another solution by another client, and now there's no communication between the two. Spare parts aren't the same. There's other issues that end up arising once you have more than one of these. So you want to think about future-proofing the design. And then, of course, find an integration company, somebody who can help you and that you enjoy working with. Nobody wants to work with somebody that they don't like. So try to look around, contact a couple and see, if the relationship's there. Make sure they're qualified. There's examples of things they've done before. And to echo Bruce again, actually, talk to the workers on the floor. Sometimes, you'll try solving a problem that either isn't a problem or will introduce new problems on the factory floor, right? So talk to the people that really will be using it, get their buy-in. It will help with the easing of implementation as well. And then, a couple more points, automate the stuff they hate doing. That's an easy way of easing the process. If it is an issue of people not necessarily liking automation, being scared by it, or being worried about job security, do the things they hate. That's an easy selling point. Once they see that it works, they will like it because it's like, now I don't need to worry about that. The machine's got it. Or, automate something that humans simply aren't good at, like high-speed vision, for example. Something that they will look at and be like, well, I couldn't do that even if I wanted to, right? So yeah, those steps can help, and not only help with the actual integration, but help with the implementation and the buy-in from everybody else. So
great. And I think, you really touched on what the next question is going to be. So I'll go to you, Phil, first. When you think about the ROI of this, there's going to be tangibles and intangibles. So you referenced in the beginning, you talked about when you implemented at IMO Foods, there was a good reduction in the tasks that people didn't necessarily want to do. So maybe that was an unintended consequence of some of this. But how would you evaluate your current investments or your past investments or any future investments in automation? What kind of mechanisms do you evaluate it for your company?
Well, initially, if we use the like a typical ROI, which you'd say, what's this going to cost? What's my reduction in labor? Okay, I have a 1 year, 2 year payback. But something as Nathan mentioned, there's other things involved in the ROI. So is it going to increase production, which then helps you on cover your overheads? In our case, when we can divert people from one area to another area, we can get more production. So not only did we get a reduced cost and increased productivity in the area that we addressed, we also improve our production in another area, which then really adds on to our ROI. So that's huge for us, especially in a rural area that we're pretty remote. It doesn't feel remote to me because I've lived here all my life, but people that come here think, wow, this is remote. So, and sometimes getting people to work in that is difficult to get the right number of people. So anytime we can find ways to add productivity without needing more people, it's key and increases our production. So you have to look at some of the other sides of it, not just straight labor reduction and how long is that going to take to pay back.
Absolutely. That sounds great. And Bruce, do you have, is it the same for you? Do you have any other ideas of things that you'd recommend for others and how you've evaluated?
So return on investment for us has been, we're still probably calculating some of that. With the robot, it's fairly new in our operation. And what we find is if you've got a man running the machine, okay, you've got cycle times at 100%. But when we're talking about running, I'm going to use a term called lights out, which in our industry, in our trade, is one of those things that we can walk away. If it's a midnight shift that ends, the machine will run on its own until the next guy comes in the next morning. So for lights out operation, we need to make sure that machine is running safely. Having a man in front of it, it would be running 100%, but they'd have to be changing parts in and out. Lights out, we might lose 20% on a cycle that we have to do other passes, or we have to do different process but we might run slower. So the calculations aren't necessarily cut and dry. We're gaining hours, which are very easily measurable. But if you're running at 80% instead of 100%, you have to look at all options, depending on what you're measuring. Phil's operation would be very different than ours. But for us, you have to take the equations and try to work with them. You want to run it safely. You have to run it safely. So you may run automation a little bit slower than you would with a man in some cases. With a person in front of the machine, there's also measurables that I've never been able to measure in my 25-year career on things like washroom breaks and just management. Just me walking down to talk to the people on the floor. What time is that taken away from productive hours? If you've got a machine or a robot, in our case, in this case, running in the background, I can go down and talk to the guy all day long, and the parts are still coming off the floors. So the return on investment, try to drill into it. It's a bit of a moving target in our case, and I've had a hard time drilling right into what that looks like. You can make some estimates up front, but I'd caution everybody to make a cautious return on investment, because the buy-in is important. You need it to work, or the second level automation isn't going to happen. So from an owner's perspective, and even going with a client, I'd rather go safe and make sure that everybody is going to see success than put too lofty a goal out there and on payback and the whole deal. So.
And it all makes sense. I mean, I think when you think of any capital investment, someone does an ROI calculation and build a business case, and making it come to fruition is a different story sometimes. So Nathan, you're on the outside of things, so you'd be working with your clients on trying to establish what those ROIs are to get them to engage in initiatives. Do you have any recommendations and suggestions of how you tend to work with clients?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, that is really cool that Bruce is looking at running lights out. That's awesome, really. I did want to highlight sort of an unexpected issue that I ran into when I came here that is facing businesses in Atlantic Canada more so than I've kind of ever seen before, which really comes down to the people that are retiring, that are doing certain tasks, and the lack of employees currently to take their place. Because the people that could or would step into that have gone elsewhere to find education, a better, more lucrative job, higher skill, or maybe not higher skill, but different skill set. So as Phil said, you need to factor in the fact that you may or may not even have people. That's almost priceless and hard to put a cost to, other than lost production when somebody calls in sick or somebody retires. So that's been a unique dynamic for me to sort of play with. Back in Ontario, it was how many dollars and how much can we save, not can we make production tomorrow because we may not have people. So that's something to think about. Not as easy to quantify, but going into quantifiable elements, I kind of have a rough list here, because even when I'm talking with clients, I want to make sure that I hit all of these other more hypothetical, a little more arbitrary, but nonetheless important elements. So I'll go ahead and touch base on those. As opposed to labor directly, try to quantify rework. So what does it cost you to rework a part? If, for example, you're getting a quality benefit by the consistency of a robot, you're no longer having as many hours spent reworking a part, right? As Bruce said, you may go slower, but perhaps you're actually having a net increase. Same thing goes with scrap as well. So if you can't rework a part, what does it cost you if you lose a part, right? You lose the material costs, the hours, let's say recycling or some sort of management of the scrap. So try your best to quantify that. Same goes for warranty. So do you have a client that sends a part back to you when it's a fail, right? And then do you need to spend time investing, some time or effort into fixing that? Inventory reduction is another thing. Sometimes with the right data management, the right insight, the right, et cetera, the more you see, the better you get. You might be able to do just-in-time production, right? So now you're not trying to account for trends or build up the buffer because you don't know when the next order's coming. When systems talk together, you can reduce inventory, right? And that can be good. That goes along with floor space as well, right? Sometimes that's of importance. I think we touched on it, or I think Phil mentioned it, but capacity gains is another. So if I can make this and my workforce is free, can I make something else? Can I get capacity gains that way? Is there another revenue stream perhaps if I do something else, right? And then kind of difficult to quantify, but insurance reduction is another. If you have monitoring solutions on your equipment, like I know a couple people in the area that do, your insurance premiums go down. So you can factor that in. And then lastly, last two would be employee retention. What would that mean to you if you could, quantify that? And then the other is customer retention as well. So, keeping your customers happy with good, high quality, accurate, timely equipment and production. So all of those have a value. What you give it or what we give it when we work with you is variable, but at least it gets the thought process going.
And I think we'll also share in our comments section, Nathan's written a blog, and we'll share that with you as well, because there's some elements. I think that big long list as well is hugely valuable, and I'm sure people can reach out to you, to any of you on LinkedIn or wherever, and connect to try to find some of those solutions. And you've all kind of touched on this a little bit. So let's talk about the partially uncomfortable part of automation. There tends to sometimes be some negative language that comes around automation and its impacts. So how do you manage that conversation? And Phil, I think we'll start with you. You were the one who was that early adopter of really trying to get IMO Foods to automate. How do you manage the conversation when people ask about what the negative impacts of automation may be?
Well, the first one is, I think we touched on, everybody says, oh, you're automating, you're getting rid of employees, and we're not going to have jobs anymore. And as we mentioned, in a rural area, jobs are important to keep people in the area. And I think people can see that when you have the automation and you haven't reduced the workforce, and we continue to add different forms of automation and continue even to add to the workforce, that takes that question out of the equation. So that's a big thing from the workforce, that they don't start having a negative feeling about this and can support it. And that, as Bruce has mentioned too, you have to have buy-in with the culture, and that can be very disruptive if you don't get that buy-in. The second scary part about the automation is, do you have the right skill set to adopt the automation? And being in a rural area, we don't have access to all the skill sets maybe that we need. And since we've had the internet, which has been a long time, but it's changed the playing field for us completely. The playing field feels much more level. We have access to information very quickly. We can look up things like everybody. If you have a problem, you look it up on Google. And the other aspect of it is, every one of the new pieces of equipment we put in, and the more sophisticated equipment, and in the original vision was this way as well, is connected to the internet. So we get the actual designer of the equipment, we get the programmer comes in and can tweak it and keep us running. So I think that's a big worry for an owner and a manager of a company. It's like, okay, I put in this automation, can I keep it running? It's nice on day one. It's like a new car. Everything's nice, and then, can I keep solve problems? And yeah, the internet and just like this we're using today, the technology makes it so easy to operate in a rural area and have, world-class expertise at your fingertips.
Fantastic. I think, that key message you initially started with, it was a task that you automated that people really didn't want to do in the first place. And that's kind of great in making your employees happier. Bruce, you started, culture was one of the first things you talked about. So can you kind of shed some light on how you kind of change that message, or how you might respond when someone asks you questions about the impacts?
Internally, I've been very, very lucky that our company and our people know that I'd like to think they know that we've got our employees' best interests. So when we're talking automation, our automation projects have been to help or benefit the company, but also the employees. So there's a win-win for everybody in automation if you can find it. And for us, with automation, we've been able to get early buy-in because it's taken steps out of our employees' days. So if we can get a machine running in the background that they can check once a half an hour or once an hour, compared to walking back and forth every time, that's a win for them. They can concentrate on a more complicated setup and keep their mind in the game in another area of the plant. Even the items that we've designed for clients, we're usually looking at pain points. So it's amazing. It's amazing when you're dealing with the people firsthand. I tend to get more buy-in from the plant and the people than I do from people we're talking about automation. If you're having a general conversation, and my wife included, I told her we were putting a robot in, and, well, you're eliminating jobs, the first word out of her mouth. And it's a cultural thing, and it's not right. And I think the Maritimes are behind maybe Central Canada with that culture. Automation is going to allow the Atlantic provinces, East Coast Canada, to be competitive. We don't have the labor force to be able to bring in. We can run our lines. We can figure these pain points out using automation. Where 30 years ago you'd throw labor at it, it's not there. People don't want to people don't want, the culture is today that they don't want to do some of those tasks. And if you've got those tasks that are hit and miss, it's really hard from an owner's perspective to try to keep production moving. So the conversations I've had on most plant floors can be very, very positive. And not one of them have actually been about labor reduction. If anything, it's about moving labor to more important tasks. And that's perceived positive from both the plant and the employees. So
fantastic.
And I think
Nathan,
I talked all around it.
No, I think this is great. I think you're all it's all a similar message, which is fantastic to see. And I think it aligns with what Nathan started talking about as well when he said in Atlantic Canada, we've been a little bit slower to adopt these automation processes. And so Nathan, is there, going back to the fact that you're trying to help enable your clients with the same key messages, are there other things that you'd share that you add when you're trying to encourage someone to explore adoption of new technologies?
Sure, absolutely. I hate to be the guy that throws out a fact, but there was a fact I read through Statistics Canada, actually, while I was doing some research for an article that I was writing, and it sort of changes the conversation, to be honest. So what they found is between 1997 and 2017, clients who automated in the same sector as the other ones that were being compared to actually found a net increase of 15% of overall employees when they automated versus those who didn't, right? So that is quite counterintuitive. You might imagine that what you're doing is replacing jobs and therefore you have less people. But what actually ends up happening, as shown in this statistic, is that because of your increased capacity gains in other things that you end up doing, your company grows such that you actually have a net increase of people. So as soon as you look at it that way, it changes the conversation a little bit. One thing that is noted, however, and we've spoke of it already, is you are potentially replacing jobs that people do too. Like, there's no getting around that. Sometimes it's better if a machine does a certain job. But if you look at it as a whole, from, let's say, society or business, it's actually a net benefit. So as long as you can sort of understand that and put it out there in a digestible way, it actually can be seen as a total net increase, a positive increase. Now, for those people that have lost their job, let's think about them a little bit too. There's lots of programs out there directly used for cross-training of, one skill that is no longer needed, let's say, and merging it into something that is needed, right? I'm sure we all have worked at a company in which the employer would love to keep that person, but can't justify it because of something that happens, right? Some system that comes in. So there's lots of programs through the government, through federal government, through provincial. As Phil said, I hate to admit how much I use Google for my own job, but you Google training and you'll find there's so many different options out there that you could help your employees, merge over to a different skill set. And I mentioned it before, but when you're able to automate and you're able to bring a new skill requirement, as Phil mentioned as well, you can actually attract those people, attract those students, attract those young generations that have that skill set but don't have a place to apply it. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, really, in which you automate to replace, somebody who may be retiring and, bring in the skill set that the students who left are trying to fill. So it sort of brings everything back to rural Nova Scotia and helps everybody. And one last fact, because I found it really interesting as well, in the same report, it's quite surprising, but the distribution of people in rural Nova Scotia to a major city, that distribution variance hasn't been seen in Ontario, for example, since I think 1916. So it's kind of unprecedented in my world how spread out Nova Scotia is. So anything we can do to bring back that skill set that may have left is kind of a win-win for everybody, right?
Absolutely. Now, for those of you who are joining us online, please feel free if you have questions, submit them. You can submit them on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, whatever you're observing on. And also you can send an email to info@coveocean.com and we will throw those questions to our panelists. I do have a question around any risks. So thinking about either what you've read, what you've experienced, what kind of vulnerabilities or limitations are there to us exploring the automation, the AI or robotics adoption? Bruce, do you have any risks that are top of mind or you've come across?
Sorry, risks come with any of this, in my opinion. From our perspective, it gets very expensive when things go bad. You've got very expensive materials going through machines, products going through machines, and when things go bad, if we're running lights out or things break, it costs thousands in a hurry. It's the big thing there, and it's really easy as a plant. There's a culture in industry that you've got your employees that are typically rated on performance, they're rated on quality, they're rated on all these tangibles. You have to be careful with automation and some of the risks, because you are going to have days, nights that you're going to go backwards. And if your employees are being rated on, let's say, scrap, but it's theoretically they're on shift, but the robot goes bad or the conveyor goes bad or something in that automation line goes bad. In order to get them to embrace it, you have to make sure they're not being rated on the failures of the robot. So it's a fine line to find necessarily for a plant owner, management, whatever the case may be, on how do you measure the payback, the performance, but not necessarily tie negatively your employees to it. You need them to see the uptake, but you can't rate them necessarily on the negative side. So there's days that can derail automation for plants. You walk in and you've got $10,000 worth of damage. That's really easy. Okay, that's enough. We're done. But you have to stop in your tracks and say, okay, what was the problem? How do we prevent it next time? And how do we get through it? So every automation process, I believe there is a risk. There is a risk, and you have to keep driving past the problems and create that culture. And eventually, your employees will get it if they know they're not being reprimanded for a negative shift or a negative night when something goes down. So
I feel like you've just opened the window for people. Oh, sorry. I feel like you've opened the window for people to know that it is okay if things don't go perfectly right now.
It's gotta be part of the process. Just know that. So.
And Phil, what about you in terms of any of those risks, things associated with, maintenance and repair and upkeep, and what are some of the risks that you saw going to automation?
Well, one of the big risks for us is we don't really destroy parts the way is talking, but it's downtime. So the best situation for us is when we have duplication, and if one machine goes down, we can split over to another machine. But there's certain instances on some of the higher tech stuff that we can't afford to have duplication. And where we can, we move it. We have the option to go manual. So where we're doing our vision inspection, we can switch it to manual if we have to, and it keeps us going at a certain rate. It's not a great rate, but at least we can keep going a little bit or divert. So to mitigate the risk, I think you have to think through, can I go back to manual if I have to in certain instances? And certain instances you can't. So we have one piece of equipment that comes from France, and when it goes down, we're down. And the time zone can affect us. Because if we have to talk to them or need a part, we're going to be down. But as Bruce said, you have days when you're not very productive, and there are days with a loss. But all the good days make up for it. So you have to remember that. I think Bruce said that about remember the wins, that the down days seem to stick in your head more, but how many good days did you have? How many days did you really do like record production when you kind of, that's a short win and you don't celebrate it enough maybe, and you focus on the loss. So duplication if you can have it, and just be ready to accept there are some down days.
I guess, I mean, it makes sense if you have certain employees that are skilled at certain things and they're out sick, you lose that skill too. So the equipment is, it kind of follows the same lines. Nathan, what about you when you're making clear that your clients understand the risks associated with their investment in automation?
Yes, absolutely. Just to echo Bruce and Phil as well, in my previous role and even, to this day, when we commission a new piece of machinery and we're on site, my wife will be like, how long do you think you're going to be there? And I always tell her, like, the only thing I know for sure is you don't know anything for sure, because things will change, and they do, and things go bad, and I've had them go well. So there's that, knock on wood, but it doesn't always go that way. So understand that things will change, things will go wrong, but as Phil said too, try to remember the wins. We all remember the losses, of course, they stick in our mind the most, but try to remember those, definitely. But one thing I'd like to highlight is when we have a client, or I guess it would be more of a consulting position at this point, but what I would do is I would let them know to think about certain pieces of the machinery to help reduce risks down the line, right? So I'll touch base on a couple of them. Ensure your machines are approved, they're certified, CSA, ensure Nova Scotia Power comes to do the inspection when the machine is installed. Ensure your system is safe. Talk to your integrator and ask them about safety. Have they thought about it? What's the category? Get the question going. Like, ask them what they've thought of. Ask for assessments if needed. Just ensure that they have that and they're taking that into account. Think about scalability. I've mentioned that, but especially once you start having multiple machines, ensure that spare parts will be the same. Ensure, you don't necessarily need to go to France to get a part. Try to keep things locally sourced if possible. Take into account lead times of items, because things will break. Have them either on the shelf or at least have a provision for that. Train internally if you can. It's nice to have remote support in France, but time zones are an issue, as Phil said. So at least from a small scale, try your best to have the operator or your maintenance staff understand a little bit about the machine. Take advantage of when the integrator's there, ask lots of questions, request training, understand the machine from more than an operator level, because often, and I can talk to a system we have at Phil's, but and they're getting it too now, but sometimes it's a little sensor that maybe got bumped, and it's something that can quickly get you from being down to up in reasonably a little amount of time. And then also ensure your machines are remotely accessible. So for every machine that we put in, we have a device that will allow us to troubleshoot and program from really anywhere in the world. So instead of driving 3 hours, we can just go online. Okay, we see the issue, solve it, and we're done. So those things there will help you, maintain the machine uptime, reduce downtime, and hopefully have a safe and certified machine that will, operate for years.
So because a lot of the conversation has been around physical devices and systems, and because I work in the space of AI, I feel like every single thing that you've said can be replicated for that world. So if it's an automated system, a computer vision system, if it's a system that does something electronically where a machine has to think like a human and make decisions and engage with your customers, it's all the same thing. I completely agree that you need to ensure that you understand it and you can maintain it, and there's redundancy and All of those great things. So these are all brilliant pieces of advice.
Right.
So with all of the people that are listening and joining us and are going to watch this later on as well, I'm curious about good information training and support. So what advice would you give for anyone who's looking to understand more about automation, how to make that leap? Where should they go to try to find information? Who wants to go first? Nathan?
Sure. I'll go first. Can I make one more point that when you were talking about AI and computer science there? Also ensure that your integrator has a test plan. So very important to AI, especially in software and programs, is ensure that things are documented, that you agree upon specifications, so that there's no, hanging in the wind at the end, finger pointing saying we were hoping for this. It's documented. There's a test plan. There's basically documented justification on both parties. Just wanted to throw that in there because that helps mitigate risk as well. But in regards to your question there, information, LinkedIn is a great resource, especially once you have the right things in your feed, you follow the right companies, the right news sources. I subscribe to Manufacturing Automation magazine, which is a Canadian magazine for Canadian companies to do with automation. It's free to be on their email list. I would check it out. There's, good stories, future stuff that's out there, what's going on, sort of industry standard stuff. I mentioned it before, but try to train internal skills. So if you are a large factory and you need that skill set, check out colleges, universities. There's online courses for robotics, things like that. I always recommend hiring co-op students when you can. Us at Ingenuity, we always have one. I've always had one in my department. It's great. Their brains are like a sponge, and they want nothing more than just to learn and implement the skills. So it's always nice to support that and reap the benefits of, this person hungry for knowledge. And I know you touched based on support as well. There's funding options out there. NSBI has a really good searchable place, I think, called Funding Portal. And also one thing I would recommend is try to keep don't ignore the fact that there's small wins as well from a funding perspective. Not every project needs to be hundreds of thousands. Sometimes there's quick little grants for 5,000, 10,000. And there's lots you can do with that if you put it in the right direction. So, don't ignore the small ones there. And support, talk to your peers. Phil, Bruce, people in business. It's a small province. I'm sure people know people. See what they're doing. How are they doing it? How are their experiences? And then, finally find some support, whether that's an integrator, a consulting firm, somebody who knows kind of what they're talking about. Sometimes you can have a great free conversation and, get some advice and then eventually work with that person. So, yeah.
That's great. And we'll quickly move Bruce and then we'll go to you, Phil. Bruce, do you have any other suggestions or ideas for training, information, support?
The training and the support aspect, this goes without saying. Nathan covered that off real well, but find that partner that you're going to be able to have that relationship with, be able to pick up the phone. And there's a lot of people that say that they can do this, and I'm not convinced that a lot of people can take a lot of these challenges on or whatnot. So make sure you know who you're dealing with as a company, and I think that might just be in life in general, maybe. But it is important to know who you're dealing with. I'm a big believer in reputable products. If you are putting bigger products in, and I'll use robotics as an example, there's a lot of great names out there. And those great names are going to be the ones that have the spare parts for Phil's line, my line, the redundancy that we all need for parts and service also down the road. So the partnerships go from the general guy that's going to help you immediately right down long-term to the machine manufacturer and product that you're using. So drill into that. I will comment very quickly on Nathan targeted NSBI, NACOA, IRAP. All three of those operations have been big benefits not only to our clients, but also to Precise Design in general. They also have a lot of resources, whether it's smaller programs that Nathan mentioned, co-op students that Nathan mentioned. They've been an incredible support for me and Precise Design in general, but also my customers. They're usually one of the first calls when I'm talking to a potential client, saying, listen, you need to talk to NSBI, you need to talk to ACOA, you need to talk to IRAP. And if you bring those partners in early on, those relationships are a lifetime to help your company grow. So there's my 2 cents.
That's great. Thanks. And Phil, do you have any last suggestions before we wrap up?
Well, I'd echo everything that was said. That's really hit the nail on the head. But the other thing that's worked for me is the trade shows that we go to. So in the seafood industry, you have a trade show, and lots of times they have equipment and a side to the selling of the seafood product. And it's great to see things hands-on at a trade show, and I look forward to when we can travel again to a trade show. But you get a lot of quick information. You walk through a trade show and see all this stuff working and talk to people.
Those are great. Yes, I do look forward to when we can do all of this, especially even in person. That would have been great too. I want to thank all 3 of you for your excellent feedback, ideas, suggestions, recommendations. This has been great to hear and learn from all of you. And the team here at Cove, thank you for always being so helpful and collaborative and working behind the scenes to keep everything up and running and bringing these sessions together. And to the viewers, thank you for joining in, and be sure to share this and watch again and make sure others get a chance to benefit from this conversation. And last but not least, if you'll join us in 2 weeks on February 24th, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, and we're going to be joined by Brian Ronan from Bulletproof, Matt Saunders from Cox and Palmer, and Jessica Han, who's a cybersecurity analyst with the Halifax government. So we'll get into a different side of the world of technology. So thank you very much for joining all of us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks. I know.
See you.